everybody and welcome back to a brand spanking new video where today I am giving you my full in-depth thoughts on Ascension of the Cybermen. So yes, we've had a day to think about it now, or 24 hours or so to think about it. I've had another watch of the episode to kind of more fully form my thoughts on this story. I hope you enjoyed my live reaction to it yesterday. I'm not quite sure how good a video it was. I hope it was reasonably enjoyable for you. But yes, as I said, I am very much intending to do a reaction to The Timeless Children as well next Sunday. But of course today we are focusing on the first part of the finale, Ascension of the Cybermen, which aired yesterday. And I definitely enjoyed it more on rewatch than I did initially. Like, I enjoyed it initially, but I wasn't quite sure about it so specifically. But I feel like since watching it again, I've got some more enjoyment out of it. But I still kind of feel that the overriding thought is that this feels maybe more than any other finale like a part one of a finale. Like, there's so much stuff in there that's kind of unexplained or unresolved that it feels like this story is completely going to live or die on its second part and how everything is resolved in the end. Rather than this episode on its own kind of being able to stand up as an episode, it feels like, yeah, it really requires that second part to work for this one to work. So we'll get into more of that anyway, but that's just kind of my overall overriding thought, I think. So of course, at the very beginning of this story, we get, well, this weird monologue from the Lone Cyberman about sort of this, if you have faith, if you believe, that you can kind of bring back this race or bring back this world and rebuild this empire. And it's this kind of, what's really intriguing that we saw throughout this episode is this Lone Cyberman is almost like the leader of a cult, is probably the best way I can describe it. He's the leader of this new cyber cult that is trying to kind of become the most revered and glorious Cybermen ever, but in a slightly different way, through a little bit of emotion getting in there as well, with the anger that we see from this Lone Cyberman. So I feel like that's a very, very interesting prospect that's explored throughout it. We get these nice scenes with the Doctor at one point where, or through the sort of hologram, I should say, where we hear sort of him, or the Doctor explaining that he's kind of hates his being because he's not a proper real Cyberman, but almost that's what's fueled him now, to be this new type of Cyberman, this Cyberman that's slightly fueled on emotion, and has turned it into this kind of cyber cult almost, I think is a way of looking at it. And in one of the episode's more sort of strange, or at least initially confusing moments, was the moment where we saw the Lone Cyberman, when the new Cybermen kind of came out of the warrior Cybermen that came out, suddenly the Lone Cyberman was kind of attacking them and trying to like destroy something in them with some sharp razor or something, and we hear the Cyberman screaming, which is pretty crazy and like shows how absolutely dangerous and ruthless this particular Cyberman is. And I think when I read a few people's thoughts that the idea maybe is it's like disabling at least a part of the emotional inhibitor so that they can kind of get a little bit of that emotion back that this Lone Cyberman has to kind of become like him and be able to join this cult that he's kind of forming, that he wants to lead to rebuild the cyber empire. I think that is what they're going down in that route, and it's just a really kind of interesting twist on it. It feels like this Lone Cyberman is just such an interesting villain. It's not a generic robotic Cyberman with no emotion, no interesting features as a character. It's one who is actually kind of acting on impulse and emotion to an extent, and with a real anger and determination and ruthlessness to try and use anything he can to kind of take over the world, take over the universe or whatever. And I think we're going to see that so much more explored in part two. As you may have noted when I was watching this episode with my reaction, I was to some extent surprised how long it took to kind of get the Cybermen so much involved in this story. Because it kind of took until really the last 5 or 10 minutes for us to properly see kind of the big cyber warrior race, rather than just the Lone Cyberman and these couple of Cybermen. I mean, to an extent we maybe should have expected that because this is part one of the finale, and obviously I'm sure part two will see a lot more action from the Cybermen, and this was very much kind of setting up and building us up to that moment. But I kind of felt like it was maybe a little bit predictable in when Graham and Yaz and Ravio and the other people, I can't remember their names, arrived on that sort of what was a cyber ship. I don't know, it just felt completely obvious that they were going to stumble across a massive race of Cybermen who were hiding away inside this spaceship and were going to be awakened. As much as it was a really good moment, it was a good reveal, and it was really well executed and done, it just felt kind of obvious to me, and so it maybe took away a little bit of the suspense. It just felt like we took a little bit too long to build up to that point because it just felt so obvious that's what was going to happen. But that's not to say it didn't work. As I say, it was still really, really effective in a reveal. It was really cool to see these, what they called cyber warriors, rather than just normal Cybermen. It's like a warrior brand of Cybermen that are extra dangerous, I guess, extra powerful, and there's suddenly thousands of them on this ship with Graham and Yaz and a couple of humans stuck on there and trapped on there, and like it sets up some pretty kind of challenging situation to get out of, shall we say. This was an interesting episode for the Doctor in this, in terms of I don't feel like she actually had maybe that much screen time, or at least less than maybe we've been used to in recent episodes. It kind of felt like because there was so much else going on with the Cybermen plot, well, the other part of the Cybermen plotline, Yaz and Graham, and a certain Brendan plotline, which we'll get to soon. It felt like she didn't necessarily wasn't as involved or had as much screen time as maybe I would have liked for a finale. I'm certainly hopeful, and based on the next time trailer and everything that the episode should be about next week, that next week's episode should be very heavily focused on her, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that, because it's not to say she didn't have good moments in this story. I really, really like the moment where she's tried to set up these defences to stop the Cybermen, the cyber drones, which are a really cool idea in my opinion, like cyber heads that are just drones flying around and killing people. That's just shows how ruthless they were, that even without a single Cyberman turning up, they're already defeating the humans because they've got these really powerful cyber drone things. That's a great idea. I love that. But yeah, then the fact that they're all the equipment's destroyed they brought, and Yaz, Ryan and Graham are all sort of going in at her like, well, what do we do now? Everything's destroyed. Have you got nothing else? What are we going to do? And then she just absolutely snaps, and she's like, I know this. And you can see the real anger and rage she's got, to sort of not towards them, but at the situation that she's in, and the fact she's put them in this really, really dangerous situation as well. And she's sort of just realising that because she's being reckless, that she talks about, which I think is really, really interesting, and just shows kind of the guilt that she feels and the worry that she feels that she is going to lose somebody else to a Cyberman, and how she's just unnecessarily put them in this dangerous situation. It was just a really, really great moment to see from her, I think. And for one, it was nice to see the companions actually listening to the Doctor and at least trying to leave. But I really liked that they did get split up there, and that Ryan actually wasn't able to go off with Graham and Yaz, and so it meant that kind of they were split apart, and it meant you could have the Doctor and Ryan and Yaz and Graham kind of paired off together. And it's nice to see some Yaz and Graham action, because I feel like we don't always get enough of that. It can often be Doctor and Yaz and Ryan and Graham, or the Doctor, Ryan and Graham, and then Yaz left on the side a little bit. So it's nice to kind of see that it was split off in that way, which I think worked quite well, particularly for Yaz and Graham, who I felt like were nicely involved in this story and really had a lot to do, and were very much pushing that kind of plot line of the story. It's fair to say that Ryan was probably the most underused in this episode. He just didn't really have very much to do. I think it still showed why Three Companions doesn't ultimately work, because you just can't give them enough to do in one story, unless Ryan suddenly does everything next week and it kind of balances out over the 2 episodes, but I see that as quite unlikely. It didn't really, wasn't to any detriment of the story. It just was noticeable that once Ryan kind of was paired off with the Doctor, got onto the cyber ship to go off to Koh Shamas, he kind of didn't really do anything else the rest of the story. Now, I've been dodging the bullet with it for a little bit, for as long as I can so far, but let's address the whole Brendan, Ireland, completely confusing, mysterious storyline thing that's going on in this episode. So right from the beginning, after the title sequence, we go to Ireland in something around maybe the 1920s, 1930s in Ireland, and see this man who discovers a baby in sort of a basket lying on the floor, takes him in, adopts him, he grows up, he becomes a police officer, he gets killed, he becomes back again, he retires, they're still the same age. It's so many confusing things happening without any explanation whatsoever. I just don't have a clue. I think first thing to say is this is clearly a very important plot line that is presumably going to be picked up in the second part of the story, because otherwise they would have not spent a good amount of screen time in the first part of the finale setting all this up. I did think it was a shame that there wasn't anything revealed in this episode about exactly what's going on, because it just felt that's kind of where my kind of idea of it needs to be explained well in part 2 to really work, because at the moment I just feel so confused about this that it kind of is almost a bit unsatisfying, because I just don't know what's going to be going on with it. I just can't explain it, which is really kind of annoying. Having read people's fan theories about it, I feel a little bit clearer on the possibilities surrounding this, I think it's fair to say. Initially I thought this was going to be something to do with the Cyberman and the Lone Cyberman, just given the story was all about Cybermen, and it seemed kind of like that was going to be the obvious link. But I feel like actually now that's not what it's going to be, and it's going to be something to do with the Timeless Child, or the Doctor, or the Master, or Gallifrey, or something around that plot line. So yes, what are the key things we know so far? Well, we know that he died and came back to life. I think that's a pretty fundamentally important thing. And then the mysterious ending where we see his father and the police sergeant again, who are both still young when he's old and retired, and he gets taken to this mysterious room, gets a device put on his head, and they seemingly wipe his mind, I think is the interpretation that we should take from that. So that poses many questions in the first place there. I think the other notable things that maybe push the possible theory that I've read, that could it be the Doctor? Possibly. Could it be the Timeless Child that is the Doctor, maybe? Another incarnation of the Doctor from the mysterious previous set of regenerations that might get revealed in the next episode? I don't know. But just little things like the at the end of the episode when he goes into this back room to have the device on his head, when the initial shot they do panning through with the doors look hugely similar to the TARDIS doors. When you look at kind of the shapes of the windows and the pattern on the door, it just looks very, very similar to the doors of the TARDIS. And I feel like that's kind of not a thing you would do by accident. It felt like too deliberate to just be there for no reason. And also the significant focus on this clock that he got. Now, obviously we've seen previously the use of the chameleon arch and the whole storing the essence of them or the realness of them in a fob watch or something along those lines. The device that he puts on his head certainly looks like it could be some sort of chameleon arch, maybe, that is able to kind of wipe his mind or something like that. And so maybe is he some sort of hidden Time Lord, or is it something else completely different like that? Maybe it's actually being used rather than just kind of like hiding who they really are, like we've seen previously with the use of it. Is it actually mind wiping them completely? I don't know. Certainly, I know that when I think it was with the Master, the Yana Master back in Utopia, he talked about how when he used the chameleon arch, it turned him back into a child, and he grew up from there again. And so, is it possible that this father and this police sergeant are maybe Time Lords or Gallifreyans or somehow something like that? And they are using this chameleon arch for some reason. They are trying to get him to grow old and then turn him back into a baby again and repeat that process over and over again. I don't know. Maybe that's a completely left field, bizarre theory. I don't know. But that seems maybe plausible. But then it doesn't really explain why he can survive dying. Maybe because he's got this the chameleon arch thing going on, maybe that protects him. Maybe actually he is another race of people. Like there's never any kind of like checks of who he really is. That's shown in the flashbacks, whether he's really human or anything, or just things like that they're not explained at all in this episode. So certainly it poses a lot of questions and a lot of potential theories as to exactly what it could be. There was a weird uncanny resemblance to Captain Jack when he kind of was revived himself. The way the action he did, the way it was shot with his hair, it looked almost so sort of alike to Captain Jack's side profile in that moment. I thought so. Maybe that's just a bit of sort of a nice resemblance, or maybe could it be a hint or foreshadowing to something to do with Jack? I don't know. I think it's unlikely, but who knows? I guess it's always a possibility. I feel like it is more likely to be something to do with the Timeless Child. Maybe there's multiple Timeless Children, hence it's called the Timeless Children for episode 10 rather than the Timeless Child. Maybe this is an incarnation of them. This is the original Master in some form. Is this the Doctor? Is it part of the Ruth Doctor timeline thing that's kind of might get some explanation? I don't know. There just feels like there's so many different possibilities of what it could be. But the fact we've kind of not really got any hints, I feel like is almost a little bit frustrating. I mean, we've got tiny little hints, but nothing kind of concrete that we can really work with to try and theorize. So that's the one thing that probably kind of annoyed me a little bit about this episode, is I would just liked a little bit more explanation. Didn't need to tell us everything, just a little bit more development on that plot line before the finale. Now, the ending of this story obviously saw the Doctor, Ryan, and I think it was Ethan arrive at Ko-Sharmus. Well, not at, but come and meet Ko-Sharmus, because of the implication in the synopsis it said what is Ko-Sharmus, but actually it's who is Ko-Sharmus. And we don't really know. He's just a person who guards the sort of gateway, the barrier thing that can allow you to transfer to another world, basically escape the cyber war and transfer into another universe, another dimension, another galaxy, or something along those lines, I think is the way they've worded it. And of course, it didn't wholly surprise me when it happened. I don't know, just with the way it was building up, what we've seen in the series so far, it kind of felt likely that what was going to be behind this gateway for the Doctor, of course it was going to be Gallifrey, and then of course the Master turned up as well. Like, it was still great, I still really enjoyed it, but it kind of felt not predictable, but for a fan like me who's very invested in it and dedicated to it, I wasn't shocked and surprised. I was kind of like, okay, this makes sense. Like, I understand this. Now I'm really intrigued to see where they're going to go with this next. I mean, it literally makes no sense why Gallifrey is there and it does and it doesn't. Like, it doesn't surprise me that they've done it, but it's also, there's no explanation as to why Gallifrey can be through this beacon thing here, this barrier. and why the Master has turned up with it as well. Is this a literal gateway you can just step into Gallifrey? Like, is that how it works? Are we therefore going to see an episode predominantly set on Gallifrey next week? I don't know. I'd be very, very excited if that is the case, but I guess we're going to have to wait and see and find out about that. And certainly we're going to get some major revelations next week, I think, about the Doctor, maybe her past, Gallifrey's past. I think we're going to get some pretty serious changing of the law potentially in the next episode, I think. I must say I'm very, very pleased that the Master's back. I was really, really hoping he would come back for the finale. Obviously, it's not that surprising, but I still didn't want to get my hopes up until we kind of saw him on screen, and the fact that the last episode is going to be predominantly focused on the Doctor. So we've got the Doctor, we've got the Master, we've got Cybermen plus the Lone Cybermen, we've got Gallifrey, we've got this Brendan guy and whoever he is and what he's involved with. Like, there's so much stuff going on in this episode. And even without thinking about any of that, we've got Yaz and Graham basically dead. I really am intrigued to see how they're going to escape that, because they are trapped on some cyber warship with loads and like thousands and thousands of Cybermen. They burst through the door into the same room with them, and the Lone Cyberman said, "We're going to kill you all." Like, I don't really see any way they can get out of that. They're notably not in the Next Time trailer, which I guess is probably just covering spoilers rather than them necessarily being killed in that moment, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did. I guess the way that kind of makes me less think that is the fact that Ravio survived, and that other guy survived as well, which probably means Yaz and Graham survived that situation as well, but I really have genuinely no idea how. My cool theory that it's not going to happen, but I would love it if it did, would be that the Ruth Martin, the Joe Martin, the Ruth Doctor would turn up in that moment and save them. That would just be a perfect way to reintroduce the Ruth Doctor into the show, given that Yaz has just done this sort of call out, "Can the Doctor hear me?" sending a message on all frequencies, "Is the Doctor there? Is the Doctor there?" Like, to then have the Ruth Doctor turn up and save them would just be legendary and a perfect way to reintroduce her into the episode, which I really, really hope she's in next week, because I feel like it'll feel such an open and unnecessarily open plot thread if she doesn't turn up. But that's the theory I'd love to be true, but I'm sure it won't be. It'll probably be something more simple than that, like... Well, I don't know. I really don't know. I'd love to hear your theories in the comments below. How are they going to get out of that? And so yes, it feels like this episode has set up so many exciting plot threads for next week to resolve. It feels like it's got a lot to do, the next week's episode, in sort of 65 or 70 minutes to try and resolve so many things seems kind of a challenge. I'm very much looking forward to it though, and I feel like this has been very good setup. Overall, it was a pretty good story. It's probably not one of my favourites of all time. Like, it was just a very, very good part one that I think, as I say, will be crucial in probably part two will affect it. I think potentially if part two is great, I will enjoy this part one more in retrospect, particularly the sort of Brendan scenes when they understand what that's all about. I feel like in retrospect that might make them even better than they were at the moment. And well, the Cybermen plotline's still pretty good as well, and I'm really looking forward to see how that all plays out and links into Gallifrey as well. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this review of Ascension of the Cybermen, an episode that really does set things up very, very well for the finale. I would love to hear your comments, your fan theories down below. Do let me know in the comments what you thought about this episode. I'll be doing my What Do the Fans Think video tomorrow, because I've got lots of videos planned in the week leading up to the finale. There's going to be lots of things to get excited about, so I've got to do lots of videos about it and hopefully get you all very, very hyped for next week's episode. But apart from that, as always, hit that like button, that subscribe button if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon for another one. Goodbye.